Curious, as we begin our conversation on the generosity of God today, have any of you ever been the recipient of an upgrade? An upgrade. Okay, now you go to the hotel, you're ready to check in, and the person on the other side of the counter looks at you and says, we did have you reserved for a room with the parking lot view, but we're not very full this week. Could I move you, could I upgrade you to a room with an ocean view? And you go, is this a trick question? I think I would be okay with that. How many of you ever received an upgrade? We say, we're gonna upgrade you from a normal room to a suite, to which you look back and just go, sweet, all right. You're at the car rental counter and they say, we see that you reserved a Toyota Corolla. We got a few cars sitting around. You wanna drive a Jeep for the weekend? Would you like to drive a Mustang? No, I'm partial to a Corolla. Yes, I think I could drive a Jeep for the weekend. It's an upgrade. Now, we experience upgrades in other areas as well. Someone in a very small, cramped apartment is able to locate a larger, more spacious apartment. Someone in an apartment complex purchases a home and they go yard, glorious yard for the kids to run around in the backyard. And this is an upgrade. Some of you have at one time or another owned automobiles with very sketchy reliability. And finally, there was that wonderful day where you were able to take out a backhoe and dig a hole for that sucker, bury it in the ground, and begin to drive something that has, it reliably starts and reliably runs. This, my friends, is an upgrade in housing, an upgrade in transportation, an upgrade on vacation. What we're gonna look at today in the Bible is one of the biggest upgrades that you will ever see. I think it's the biggest upgrade in the Bible. And the story revolves around this right here. The Israelite people for generations have been slaves in the country of Egypt, right? Building Pharaoh's storage city. So they're in slavery, and they're on the way over here toward a land called Canaan, which is called the Promised Land, the land that had been promised to their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, it'd be between Egypt, the land of slavery, and Canaan, the land of promise. They're in this place called the wilderness. Now, they needed to be in the wilderness for a couple years. That's where they received, the law. That's where they built the tabernacle. So a couple years was necessary, but then they spent an additional 38 years there for remedial reasons, all right? 40 years in the wilderness. Let me give you an image here. Just me, I wouldn't want to be there for 40 years. I have no interest in the wilderness for 40 years, but as we open our Bibles today, they are about ready to leave the wilderness and enter the land of promise. And their faithful leader, Moses, is going to give them instructions and describe the upgrade that they are about to experience. So Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 7, Deuteronomy 8, verse 7, for the Lord your God is, now just try to, as I read these verses, just try to see what they're gonna experience. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land. Oh, a land with brooks, streams, deep springs gushing into the valleys and hills. This is a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig trees, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. My dear friends, this is an upgrade. From the desert, from the wilderness, from the barren, scorched, little water. Did you see some of the images that were there? Wheat and barley, grapes, what was that? Pomegranates, olives and olive oil, honey, no shortage of bread. They are about ready to move from here to here. Like I said, the biggest upgrade that you can conceive, that you can think of in the Bible. And so Moses, he's describing this. Okay, you're gonna go into a land. There's gonna be enough bread. There's gonna be streams. There's gonna be pomegranates, the rich flavors of pomegranates, the sweet taste of honey, enough bread to eat. And then he throws this down. When you get into the land, check this out. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. When you get into the land and you experience this massive gesture of God's generosity, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Does it seem strange to you that they would be told that? A little secret. Wealth is not always a friend to faith. And the very acts of God's generosity, the very gestures of God's generosity in our lives, whether housing or transportation or variety of food, the very gestures of God's generosity, which should cause the heart to respond with thanks and love and service to God, often result in spiritual drift. Now, you would think that people would drift from God when things are going really badly. The cancer's back, season of unemployment, foreclosure, bankruptcy, surgery. You would think that people would drift from God when things are going really badly. Here's the secret. Sometimes people drift from God when things are going very well. And that's the warning that was given to those people as they're ready to exit the desert, as they're leaving the wilderness. You're about to experience a massive upgrade now. Don't forget the Lord your God. Be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, because the very gestures of his generosity that should cause you to respond with, I trust you, I love you, I'll serve you, often result in spiritual drift and spiritual decline. There's a word I'm going to mention today, and I just want to get clear on what I mean by it, and it's the word wealth. Because I think there would just a lot of people here today that would go, Jeff, I'm not wealthy. I'm not rich. We're middle class. Or we're lower middle class, or we're upper middle class, but you see yourself as somewhere in the middle. So when I talk about wealth, you might be thinking of someone other than you, and for most of us, this is us. What I mean by wealth is this is more than enough. When you look into a dresser or into a closet, there's more than enough clothes in there. When you open a refrigerator door, there's options. Open the freezer in your kitchen, and there might be some things there that you placed in there during the Clinton administration. You know what I'm saying? It's, for many of you, your task is not to say, listen, I can only afford to buy one loaf of bread, one jar of peanut butter, and one 5-pack of ramen noodles, and 2 boxes of Kraft macaroni and cheese. Some of us live there. Some of us live there that are here today. But a lot of us, you just say, look, dude, I have more than enough food, and I certainly have more than enough clothes, and I sleep on a bed, and I have adequate transportation. So I just, when I talk about wealth, just don't think the ultra lifestyles of the rich and famous, ultra elite wealthy. Most of us need to think of us. Now, it is true that many of us would fall into that category. Dude, that loaf of bread, jar of peanut butter, ramen noodles, you say, dude, that's us. We do not have more than enough right now. And I've been there. I mean, Chris and I have been there. Word of financial advice to you. If you want a fast track to financial stability, do not become the pastor of a church of 25 people. I'm just saying. And we had our kids in quick succession. Sarah, Andrew, Alex. We decided to do the stay-at-home mom thing with Chris. It was just my income, and the church took forever to get off the ground. And we went through a lengthy season of significant shortage in our life. Those of you who are experiencing a season of shortage right now, I just want to alert you to something. There can come into your mind the idea, if only these financial problems were solved, we would be set, we would be good. And I just need you to hear something. If your financial situation reverses and drastically improves, you will simply be embracing a brand new set of spiritual challenges. Because wealth is not always a friend to faith. And my friends, there are people that learn how to do shortage really well, that never learn how to do abundance well. And so our conversation today is really about how to respond to the generosity of God in a way that honors him. And if you're just looking for one sentence to hang on here, remember not to forget God when things are going well. When you're adequately employed and set up an emergency fund and you're paying your bills on time and there's more than enough clothes and food, remember not to forget God. Our conversation takes place in 3 parts. Part number 1 has to do with spiritual amnesia. Spiritual amnesia, part number 1. It says, do not forget the Lord your God. The words do not forget, and remember, it's like 3 times in 8 verses, you have this do not forget or remember type thing. So spiritual amnesia. Verse 10, right in the heart of what we've read here. When you have eaten and are satisfied, praise the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Now listen, be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God, failing to observe his commands, his laws, his decrees that I, Moses, am giving you this day. Otherwise, when you eat and are satisfied, when you build fine houses and you settle down, and when your herds and flocks grow large and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have is multiplied, check this out, then your heart will become proud. And you will, here it is again, you will forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, who brought you out of the land of slavery. Spiritual amnesia, forgetting God in seasons of abundance. So let's move from their world to ours. If you have adequate housing, remember not to forget God. If as you look into a closet or a dresser drawer, it's not whether you'll have something to wear, but what do you want to wear that day? Remember not to forget God. If you have food options when you open a refrigerator or open a cupboard, remember not to forget God. If you have the leisure space to be able to take time away to restore and refresh, whether it's a cabin by a lake or whether it's a weekend in Chicago, if you've got the financial margin and the time margin to get away from home and take a vacation or a weekend getaway for some sort, remember not to forget God. Now, for those people about to leave the desert, there was a specific way that they would be tempted to forget God. And in context, these people leaving the desert, Moses challenged them that if they forgot God's commandments, they were forgetting God. That we forget God by forgetting what he directed us to do. And this was found back in verse 11, where it said, but be careful that you do not forget the Lord your God. Read with me the last part here, beginning with the word failing. Ready? Failing to observe his commands. He would go on to say, the commands I'm giving you today. This is Deuteronomy chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 5, you have the 10 commandments. So it says, when you get into the land, you're gonna have pomegranates, you're gonna have grapes, your herds and flocks are gonna grow. There's gonna be some streams that water the ground. You're gonna have olive oil. Remember the Lord's commands. And sometimes we forget to remember. Let's go back to these pictures here. Things are going well. Adequate housing, adequate clothes, more than enough house, more than enough clothes, more than enough food, and some time to get away, to refresh and repair. And all of a sudden, the guy, his three-year-old, his Lego house is destroyed by a 2-year-old sister, and the 3-year-old pronounces very loudly and angrily, Jesus Christ. And dad has an idea where the 3-year-old heard to say that word, and it wasn't Sunday school. And one of the 10 commandments was be careful how you use God's name. Do not use the name of the Lord your God in vain. And he goes, how is it that God has been so generous to me? And I'm throwing God's name around in a way that my 3-year-old is now mimicking me. And he just goes, you know what happened? I forgot to remember. I got too casual and careless in my speech. I forgot to remember. A woman has a friend that looks at her and says, you are a liar. And she vehemently denies being a liar, but later in reflection, she realizes that she kind of bends the truth, fibs, if you will, to look better on occasion. In that whole 10 Commandments thing, there's do not bring false witness against your neighbor, but it's about honesty. It's about speaking in a way that is consistent with reality. And she goes, how did I become someone that's fabricating false information? She goes, I forgot to remember. God has been so generous, and I forgot to remember. This a guy runs a home business out of his house, a small company, but it's a growing company. And some of the people he does business for, they're not very organized in their finances. In fact, he accidentally invoiced someone twice for one job, and they paid both bills. They paid for the job twice. They're just disorganized. And he said, I don't think it would be a bad business plan to begin to just take a little bit of advantage of these people that apparently have so much money to throw around, they don't even know that they're paying the same bill twice. One of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal. Respect other people's property. Do not take what does not rightfully belong to you. He goes, man, what happened to me? Easy, you forgot to remember. You forgot to remember. And things are going well employed, more than enough house, more than enough clothes, more than enough food, time to get away. And a flirtatious interest begins at work, and husband or wife gets involved with someone they should not be involved with. Say, dude, what happened there? And he says, well, we were the recipients of the generosity of God, and we forgot to remember one of the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not commit adultery. So this is what Moses is saying to these people who are leaving the desert. You are about to experience a massive upgrade. You are about to receive gestures of the generosity of God on a level that you have not seen ever. Because before the wilderness was the era of slavery. So I got to remind you something. When you get into the land and your wealth begins to grow, don't forget God. And here, to forget God's commands is to forget God. Can I just impress something upon you for a moment and just try to lean your way for a moment? As I just went through those quick illustrations, did anything kind of hit your heart and go, oh man, that is so me? One, becoming a recipient of the generosity of God through our food, through our clothing, and through the sending of Jesus who gave himself for us. As we taste that generosity, there should be something that surges that goes, God, I desire to thank you, I desire to love you more, and I desire to serve you. I think it would be appropriate for us to identify spiritual drift when we see it occurring. We sang a song, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, those haunting words, prone to what? Prone to wander. Lord, man, I feel it, man. I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. It just acknowledges the possibility of spiritual drift, and often this happens while we are the recipients of God's generosity. So conversation number one is spiritual amnesia. And my challenge is just this: remember not to forget. Part two of our conversation just has to do with the current of pride. And we're talking about the current here, talking about a kind of a river that is flowing downstream. Now, verse 14 in this passage, then your heart will become what? Then your heart will become proud, and you will forget the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. It seems that as sufficiency grows, and dude, I got more than enough, it seems like the gravitational pull, the current, is toward pride, the current of pride. Now, just kayak up here, did a bit of kayaking this summer, probably went out a dozen times or something like that. But on two occasions, floated different stretches of the Grand River. Now, the Grand River does not flow fast, and the current isn't swift, but it does move. And if you're sitting in the kayak, if you're sitting in the kayak, all you have to do to end up downstream is sit there. All you have to do to float downstream is nothing. However, turn that kayak around, it takes a little bit of exertion to paddle upstream. When we talk about the current of pride, what I just want to recognize together is as your wealth grows, all you have to do to drift spiritually is nothing. The current will take you away. Now, the issue of pride, let's dig deeper on that because verse 17 breaks out what's involved in this here. It says, you may say to yourselves, self, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. You're going to get into the promised land. You're going to tend your grapevine. You're going to plant olive trees. You're going to plant grain. You're going to harvest the grain. You're going to enjoy bread. And you're going to say three lethal words, I did this. You're going to say, my power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. Now, there's a reason you would say that. Because you had an awful lot to do with it. Wheat doesn't plant and harvest itself. You had an awful lot to do with it. So just profile of financial health. All things being equal, you will be much healthier financially if you work diligently, spend carefully, and save faithfully. Just Captain Obvious here, but people who work consistently, all things being equal, generally do better financially than people who don't work consistently. Are you with me on that? People who apply themselves at work, all things being equal, generally do better than people whose goal it is to show up and do as minimal a work as possible without being fired, right? So, dude, that's me. I work diligently. I show up, I set an alarm clock, I'm there on time, I work hard. Secondly, spend carefully, because sometimes we get upside down financially and it's not an earning problem, it's a spending problem. It doesn't matter how much we're making, we always tend to spend just a little bit more, just a little sloppy in the money going out. And so an individual who says, look, we're gonna set up a budget, and a budget is basically in advance telling your money where it's gonna go. That's what a budget is, in advance telling your money where it's gonna go. I said, no. We used to be out of control spenders, and now we are careful spenders, so that every year we are spending less than we earn. And then the third one is just save faithfully. And when you spend less than you earn, some of that money can be put in the bank. You build an emergency fund, and that means that when there's a car repair or an appliance that dies in your house, it doesn't throw you into a panic and back to credit card use, because there's money in reserve for that to happen. And so these three simple things, work diligently, spend carefully, and save faithfully, when done for a long enough period of time, can really help one be healthy financially. Again, just to state the obvious, you have something to do with those things. And just as you're looking at that and say, some of you are going, hey, dude, that's me. I work diligently. I spend carefully. I save faithfully. I did this. I got us where we are today. And this is where pride creeps in, because I did this can easily morph. The three words I did this can easily morph into I did this without you. Verse 18 in this Deuteronomy passage, but remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. I think it would be a good one to read together. I just want you to hear yourself read it. Ready? But remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. I work with these hands. Who gave you those hands? I use this mind. Who blessed you with that mind? No, Jeff, I'm creative and industrious, and you're made in the image of God, who is the creator, and part of what it means to be made in his image is to be able to be creative. Something should humbly pronounce, God, I had outside help. I set an alarm clock, I showed up to work, we restructured a budget, we got money we set aside in the bank, we did this, but we had help. We had outside help. It is you who gives the ability to grow wealth, the current of pride. Conversation number one just had to do with the spiritual amnesia. Conversation number two, the drift of pride. And conversation number three is probably the most important, paddling against the current. Say, okay, dude, if all you have to do to end up downstream is just sit there in the kayak and do nothing, what does it look like? What does it look like to respond to God's generosity in a way that's appropriate? Not to respond by forgetting him, but to respond with a heart that is more thankful and more loving and more serving. What I want to do is switch stories on you. For those of you that are new with us, generally we anchor in one story, one incident in Scripture. But I want to jump here to hundreds of years after that desert experience. It's now after the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, well over 1,000 years after that, leaving the wilderness experience. And here in the city of Ephesus. Now, first century Ephesus was the trade center on the Eastern Aegean Sea, was the fourth largest city in the Roman Empire. Tons of trade and traffic going through the city, and became a center for the Jesus community just a short time after Jesus' crucifixion. And so a pastor by the name of Timothy is sent there by the Apostle Paul to shepherd the group of believers in Ephesus. So in the book of 1 Timothy in your Bible, you've got the older pastor Paul writing to the younger pastor Timothy as he leads the congregation there. So 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. Hey, Timothy, command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, there's the pride issue again, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our... Does this surprise you that that's there? Who richly provides you with everything for your enjoyment. My friends, that verse right there crystallizes my greatest challenge in life in how to deal appropriately with my stuff. How to enjoy it without putting my hope in it. I put my hope in a car, house, or clothing when I begin to derive my self-esteem from them and my value from them and my security from them. I begin to derive my hope with a retirement fund when I watch it grow and go, you are my security in this world. It says not to put their hope in wealth, but to put their hope in God. I can turn my stuff into a counterfeit God, and rather than receiving it as a gift to be enjoyed, I can try to make it do something for me that it was simply never intended to do. Fix the hole in my heart. So that right there, I think, is a massive challenge. I mean, for some of you, I would write that out word for word and keep it posted where you can read it every week. How to enjoy it without putting your hope in it. But who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Back to the picture. Those who have adequate housing, I think our gracious God would say, enjoy this. Those of you that have clothing that you love, this might include a pair of jeans that you've worn for 14 years that you keep pulling out of the garbage every time your wife throws it in the garbage. Enjoy this until you lose it permanently. Those of you that have more food items than, ramen and mac and cheese and peanut butter on bread, those who have food items, I think our gracious God would say what? 2 words, what? Enjoy this. Those of you who have time to take off and repair and restore, whether it's going to a tranquil lake or whether it's taking a weekend getaway to another city, enjoy this. Who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Just don't put your hope in it. Just don't let it define you. Just don't find your ultimate value. See, here you go. If you have come to know Jesus as your rescuer, you are most defined not by what you own, but who owns you. Not by what you buy, but who bought you. What this means is you don't get your identity from a house, you bring an identity to your house. You bring the identity to your position, to your job, rather than receiving your primary identity from it. Enjoy this, enjoy this, enjoy this. Just don't put your hope in it. Well, I still haven't answered the kayak question. Thank you so much, dude, for the information. It still doesn't tell me how to paddle upstream. Okay, you want to go against the current of your culture. It's 2 faithful, consistent disciplines you need to embrace. Now, the verse we're going to read, it looks like 4 things. But they can actually be broken down kind of 2 and 2. So check it out with me. Timothy, command them to, what? Thing number 1, to do good. Thing number 2, to be rich in good deeds. Thing number 3, to be generous. And thing number 4, to be willing to share. Now, there's 4 things there: to do good, to be rich in good deeds, to be generous and willing to share. But the first 2, to do good and be rich in good deeds, I think that has to do with the generosity of your time. Do good, be rich in good deeds. This is you taking your time and humbly, faithfully, consistently serving other people. The last 2, and be generous and willing to share, I think that has to do with generosity of money. And so the way I've broken these down is 2 words: serve and share. I think that's how you paddle upstream. I think that's how you resist the spiritual drift that comes in a culture when you have more than enough. Serve and share, share and serve. What's serving doing in this financial conversation between Paul and Timothy? Timothy, command them to do good and to be rich in good deeds. Those in your congregation who are afflicted with having more than enough, afflicted with affluence, encourage them to do good and be rich in good deeds. Challenge them to serve. What's that doing there? There's something about growing wealth that causes the heart to think, it's all about me, it's all about me, it's all about me. My friends, there's something about consistently, faithfully serving other people that trains the channels of the heart to say, it's not all about me, it's not all about me, and it's not all about me. As your wealth grows, it becomes vital that you humbly and consistently find places to serve. Here we go. Serving is anti-arrogance training. Serving is anti-arrogance training. The individual that says, okay, every Wednesday afternoon, I drive to that nursing home to visit my aunt. It trains the channels of the heart to go, it's not all about me, it's not all about me, and it's not all about me. And the wealthier you go, the more important that becomes. Teach them to do good and be rich in good deeds. The individual says, every Monday afternoon, I drive to this school and I help with an after-school program, some kids that are struggling with their reading. And the fact that you do that consistently and do it again and again and again and again, we live in a culture that has more than enough, and it's a way to train the heart to say, it's not all about me, it's not all about me, it's not all about me. The individual says, as I go through this mountain of email, every single day I will write an email to someone just to thank them for who they are and what they do. Because some people are starved for a word of encouragement and are so tired and beaten down by life. Every single morning in getting through a mountain of email, I'll write one email of encouragement to someone. As your wealth grows, do you realize how important something like that becomes to humbly, faithfully, consistently serve? It trains the channels of the heart to say, it's not all about me. It's not all about me. It's not all about me. I just want to honor those at Ada Bible Church who serve regularly, who serve our 2-year-olds in the nursery. who work with our fourth graders on a regular, routine, systematic basis. Those who make it a point to arrive at our buildings early and make coffee and set out cookies for us. There's something in the heart that regular, consistent serving does that just goes, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me. Serving faithfully and consistently with a humble spirit trains the channels of the heart to think better about our money. It's one way that we paddle against the current. There was two words there. There were two words. One was serve and one was share. So we can go back to the picture real quick. Share. We've talked about this before, and we will again. And it's just, if you are a follower of Christ and every dime you make is being spent on you, something has gone drastically wrong. If you are a recipient of the generosity of God in the person of Christ, and every penny that you make is spent on you, something has misfired. Because when you get to know a generous God, a natural response is to have generosity unleashed in our lives, whether it's generosity of time or generosity of money. It is within your spiritual DNA to live as a generous person. This is how we paddle upstream, to serve and to share and to share and to serve. And I think about this. I think about this a lot. I think about spiritual drift. I think about what it's like to have more than enough. I think about sitting there and floating downstream and the work it takes to move the other direction, to paddle against the current. I moved 3 months ago. I moved from the home that we had lived in for 23 years, the house in which we raised our kids for most of their lives. And a short answer on why we moved is we encountered a house, we bumped into a house that we thought we would immensely enjoy. The house that had been home for 23 years was a country setting, on a road, 2.5 acres. New house is more in a neighborhood adjacent to a bike trail. Lots of massive trees and shade, which I consider an upgrade, and which for my son worshiping wife is a downgrade. Same number of bedrooms, significantly more entertainment space on the main floor. A couple of years ago, studying in my sunroom, my son, Andrew, adult son, was walking in for some reason. He looked into the sunroom and he asked a very adult question. He said, "Dad, how are you doing?" And I answered honestly. That particular day wasn't going so well. I said, "Well, I'm experiencing a lot of challenges and just a lot of things I need to respond to. And just quite frankly, it's just kind of a disappointing season for a couple different reasons." And he just kind of stood there and he thought for a minute. And then he responded. He said, "Well, Dad, it's like you always say. It's not what's happening to you, it's how you respond to what's happening to you that's probably gonna make the biggest difference." I said, "Thank you, son, for quoting me to me." But yet, this house thing, I needed to quote me to me. I published this 4 years ago. It's called Satisfied: Discovering Contentment in a World of Consumption. And I needed to read me to me. I wrote this in the conclusion, and so indulge me as I serenade you for a moment. We live in the house in which we raised our children. Remember, this was 4 years ago. A home that is more than adequate, and yet we find ourselves nosing around from time to time, wondering if a move lies somewhere out there in our future. Our conversation is marked by an overarching tone of freedom. We feel free to stay and we feel free to move. Whatever we decide, we are confident of a few things. And then I have some bullet points. There's 4 bullet points here. First one has to do with contentment. Bullet point number 1. If we are incapable of finding contentment in our current home, we assuredly will not find contentment in a new one. The second is on identity. A different house cannot define us, rescue us, or fill us. Any latent emptiness or dysfunction will stalk us to a new dwelling. And our real identity and fullness will follow us as well. Who we are fundamentally cannot be altered by a new address. Number 3 has to do with serving and sharing. We are deeply committed to a lifestyle that includes serving and sharing. Therefore, we will not allow the choice of a home to erase financial margin and cripple our giving. The amount we are willing to pay for a different house will affirm that the kingdom we are building is not our own. The last bullet has to do with laughter and life. The crowning achievement in any home is the laughter and life enjoyed there. We trust that any dwelling we choose or remain in will be a haven for family and an oasis for friends and strangers. What am I saying there? I think I'm saying that we have more than enough, and I don't want to forget God. I want to respond to the generosity of God in a way that honors him. I don't want to forget God, and I don't want you to forget him either. My friends, in our culture, we will be paddling upstream. We will be paddling against the current. I just want to challenge you. 2 ways to do that are to commit yourself to serving and sharing and serving. I can't think of anything more countercultural than sacrificing your precious time and giving your money away. These work to rescue the heart and help us remember not to forget. Let me ask you to stand. We'll be dismissed with a prayer this morning. I'm so glad you're here today. And I ask that our gracious God would continue to speak into our lives, whether in a season of shortage or abundance. I pray for my dear friends that we would know God as our true hope and our only hope, and as our first love. Gracious God, guide us day after day after day to think sanely and generously about you and your kindness and your ways. We ask these things in the name of Jesus, our Lord, because he generously came here for us. Amen. Thanks for being here today.